September 7th, 1988, Wembley Stadium. 72,000 fans, screaming Michael Jackson's name in the largest concert of his career. But 3 hours later, his head of security would find him in a storage room, alone in the dark, crying so hard he couldn't breathe. What happened between the standing ovation and that devastating moment would reveal the truth about fame that nobody talks about. And what Michael did next would change everything he thought he knew about strength. If you want to understand the real cost of being the most famous person on earth, and witness the moment when Michael Jackson discovered that his greatest power wasn't his talent, it was his courage to be broken, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story will shatter everything you think you know about success. The energy inside Wembley Stadium on that September evening was beyond description. This wasn't just another concert. This was the final show of the Bad World Tour's European leg, and Michael Jackson had something to prove. For 18 months, he'd been battling tabloid headlines that questioned everything from his appearance to his personal choices. The media had been relentless, creating narratives about his life that bore no resemblance to his actual experience. They don't write about the music anymore, Michael had told his choreographer Vincent Patterson during rehearsals that afternoon. They write about everything except what actually matters. Sometimes I feel like I'm not even a real person to them, just a character they've invented. Vincent had tried to reassure him, but Michael's eyes carried a heaviness that no amount of encouragement could lift. The weight of constant scrutiny, of living every moment under a microscope, of having his humanity questioned daily, it was becoming unbearable. But when those stage lights hit and 72,000 voices erupted in welcome, something happened to Michael Jackson that always happened. He transformed. The vulnerable man who moments before had been fighting back tears became the king of pop. Every movement was precision itself. Every vocal note was crystalline perfection. He moonwalked across that stage like gravity was optional. He spun, he posed, he commanded that audience with the supernatural presence that had made him the biggest entertainer on the planet. But here's what nobody in that audience could see. Beneath the sequin jacket and the confident smile, Michael was fighting the hardest battle of his life, and he was losing. The set list was flawless. From Wannabe Starting Something through Thriller, Billie Jean, Beat It, each song was delivered with the artistry that only Michael Jackson could bring. During Man in the Mirror, he'd made eye contact with a young girl in the front row who was crying, and he'd pointed directly at her, mouthing, "This is for you." That moment, captured on video, would become iconic. But what the cameras didn't capture was the single tear that rolled down Michael's own cheek, hidden behind his choreographed movements. His band noticed. His backup singers noticed. The crew who had worked with him for years all noticed something different about tonight's performance. There was a desperation in his energy, as if he was trying to prove something, not to the audience but to himself. He was performing like someone saying goodbye, Sheryl Crow, one of his backup singers, later recalled. Every movement had this intensity that went beyond artistry. It felt personal. It felt like pain. When the final notes of Man in the Mirror echoed through Wembley, when Michael struck his final pose and 72,000 people rose to their feet in thunderous appreciation, the ovation lasted for 7 solid minutes. People were crying. They were screaming his name. They were holding signs that read, "We love you, Michael, and you changed my life." And that's when Michael Jackson felt more alone than he'd ever felt in his entire life. The contrast between the noise of that stadium and the silence of Michael's dressing room was jarring. One moment he was surrounded by adoration from 72,000 people. The next he was completely alone, staring at his reflection in a mirror, surrounded by bright bulbs that seemed too harsh, too revealing. He could still hear them chanting his name outside. The crowd hadn't dispersed yet. They were lingering, hoping for one more glimpse, one more moment of connection with the man who had just given them the performance of a lifetime. But inside that dressing room, Michael Jackson was experiencing something that terrified him more than any stage fright ever could. The crushing realization that being loved by millions of people didn't protect you from loneliness. In fact, somehow it made it worse. His hands were shaking as he removed his stage makeup. Not from exhaustion. Michael's stamina was legendary. They were shaking because he was trying so hard not to fall apart, and he was failing. "Pull yourself together," he whispered to his reflection. "You just gave them everything they wanted. You were perfect. You did your job." But that was exactly the problem. He'd been so perfect, so controlled, so carefully constructed, that he no longer knew where the performance ended and the real person began. Frank DeLeo, Michael's manager, knocked on the door. "Michael, everyone wants to see you. The promoters, the crew, they want to celebrate. This was the biggest show of the tour. We're talking record-breaking numbers. Give me 10 minutes, Michael called back, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "I just need to change." "Sure thing. But Michael, you were incredible tonight. Really. One for the history books." Michael didn't respond. He waited until he heard Frank's footsteps fade down the hallway. Then, moving quickly, he grabbed his street clothes and left the dressing room through the back exit that most people didn't know existed. He needed to be somewhere, anywhere, where he wasn't Michael Jackson's superstar. He needed to be somewhere he could just be. What he didn't know was that this impulse to escape, this desperate need to disappear, was about to lead him to the most important encounter of his life. The backstage area of Wembley Stadium was a maze of corridors, storage rooms, and technical spaces. Michael had performed there multiple times, but he'd always been shepherded directly from dressing room to stage and back again. Now wandering alone in his street clothes, black jacket, fedora pulled low, he was anonymous, just another person in the post-concert chaos. He found himself walking deeper into the less used sections of the venue, away from the celebration happening near the main dressing rooms. The sounds of revelry grew fainter, the lighting became more industrial, less glamorous. Finally, he pushed open a heavy door and found himself in what appeared to be a storage area. Old equipment, unused staging materials, the forgotten infrastructure that made spectacles possible. Michael sat down on a road case, alone in the dim light filtering through a high window. And that's when it happened. The emotion he'd been holding back for months, maybe years, came crashing through every defense he'd carefully constructed. His breath came in gasps, his vision blurred with tears. And Michael Jackson, the king of pop, the man who had just commanded 72,000 people with supernatural artistry, broke down completely. He cried for the childhood he'd never had, spent performing instead of playing. He cried for the constant scrutiny that made him afraid to exist naturally. He cried for the relationships he'd lost because people couldn't separate the icon from the man. He cried for the exhaustion of always having to be on, always having to be perfect, always having to prove his worth through entertainment value. And then he heard something that made his blood run cold, footsteps approaching the storage room door. Michael frantically tried to compose himself, wiping his eyes and steadying his breathing. He couldn't let anyone see him like this. The media would have a field day. Michael Jackson has breakdown after concert. He could already see the headlines. But when the door opened, it wasn't a photographer or a journalist. It was Marcus Thompson, the head of Wembley's security team, a man Michael had spoken to perhaps 3 times during the entire tour, always briefly, always professionally. Marcus stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Michael Jackson, sitting alone in a storage room, face wet with tears, looking absolutely devastated. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Marcus did something unexpected. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't call for help. He didn't ask if Michael was okay. Instead, he walked into the room, closed the door behind him, and sat down on a road case across from Michael. "I won't tell anyone I saw you here," Marcus said simply. "You have my word." Michael looked up, surprised by the gentleness in the security guard's voice. "I'm fine," he said automatically, the lie feeling heavy on his tongue. "Just needed a minute." "You don't have to do that with me," Marcus replied. "The performance thing. I'm not a fan who needs you to be anything except human." Those words, "I'm not a fan who needs you to be anything except human," hit Michael with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had given him permission to just be? "I know I don't know you," Marcus continued, his voice calm and steady, "and I know you probably have 100 people around you all the time, but I've been doing security for big events for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of famous people, the lonely ones. They all have that same look you've got right now, like they're surrounded by love but drowning in isolation." Michael felt fresh tears threatening. How can everyone love you but nobody actually know you?" "Because they don't love you," Marcus said gently. "They love what you give them. The performance, the escape, the magic. But that's not the same as knowing the person behind all that. And my guess, you've gotten so good at giving them what they want, that you've forgotten how to just be yourself." The accuracy of that observation broke something open in Michael. "I don't even know who that is anymore," he admitted, his voice cracking. "When I'm on stage, I know exactly who I am, but when the lights go off, I feel like I'm..." What Marcus said next would change everything Michael understood about strength and vulnerability. "Mr. Jackson," Marcus began, then corrected himself. "Michael, can I tell you something about strength that took me 40 years to learn?" Michael nodded, suddenly desperate to hear whatever wisdom this unexpected mentor might offer. "Real strength isn't about never breaking," Marcus said. "It's about having the courage to break in front of people who might use it against you. It's about being so honest about your struggles that you give other people permission to be honest about theirs. You just performed for 72,000 people and made them feel something real. But you know what would be even more powerful? Letting them know that the person who made them feel that way is also struggling, is also human, is also breaking sometimes." They don't want to see that, Michael protested. They want the magic, the escape. If they see me like this, he gestured to his tear-stained face, then I'm not special anymore. I'm just broken. No, Marcus said firmly. You're not broken. You're honest. And there's nothing more special than someone with your level of talent being willing to admit they don't have all the answers. You know how many people out there feel exactly like you do right now? Successful, admired, but completely alone? If you had the courage to talk about that, really talk about it, you wouldn't just be entertaining people anymore. You'd be healing them. At that moment, sitting in a storage room with a security guard who barely knew him, Michael Jackson understood something that would redirect the entire rest of his career and life. The power wasn't in the perfection. It was in the truth. Michael and Marcus sat in that storage room for over an hour, having a conversation that Michael would later describe as more therapeutic than 10 years of actual therapy could have been. Marcus shared his own story, how he'd struggled with depression after his military service, how he'd learned that the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall apart, but the ones who fall apart honestly and keep going anyway. There's a kid I work with, Marcus said, 19 years old, new to the security team. Saw combat in his first tour, came back with PTSD that he was hiding from everyone because he thought it made him weak. You know what helped him? When I told him about my own struggles, when I gave him permission to not be okay. But you're just one person, Michael said. My struggle, if I talk about it, millions of people will know. The media will twist it, they'll use it against me. Some will, Marcus acknowledged, but millions more will feel less alone. And isn't that what art is supposed to do? Make people feel less alone? Those words would echo in Michael's mind for months, ultimately inspiring the most vulnerable and powerful work of his career. When Michael finally left that storage room, he wasn't the same person who had entered it. He still looked like Michael Jackson. Same face, same build, same fedora pulled low, but something fundamental had shifted. He returned to the celebration where Frank and the tour crew were frantically trying to figure out where he'd disappeared to. When Frank saw him, the relief on his face was immediate. Michael, where were you? We were about to call security. Actually, Michael said, glancing at Marcus, who had followed him back at a discreet distance. Security found me, and we had the most important conversation of my life. Over the next several months, Michael Jackson began one of the most profound transformations of his career. It didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't without struggle, but slowly, carefully, he began letting the world see not just the performance, but the person. And the world's reaction surprised everyone, most of all, Michael himself. In interviews, he started being more honest about the pressure of fame, the isolation of celebrity, the struggle to maintain identity when millions of people had expectations about who you should be. Some critics accused him of weakness, of losing his mystique, but for every critic, there were 100 fans who wrote letters saying, "Thank you for being human. Thank you for admitting you struggle too." He wrote songs that were more personal, more vulnerable. Earth Song contained layers of pain about feeling helpless in the face of global suffering. Childhood was his most autobiographical work, honestly addressing the childhood he'd lost and the child he still was inside. The media didn't know what to do with this more open version of Michael Jackson. They'd built careers on speculation about his private life, and now he was voluntarily sharing parts of that life, not sensationally, but thoughtfully, on his own terms. But the most powerful moment came a year after that night at Wembley, when Michael did something unprecedented. Before a concert at Madison Square Garden, Michael invited Marcus Thompson to be his guest. Not just any guest. Michael wanted Marcus to meet him backstage before the show. "I want you to see something," Michael told him, leading him to the dressing room mirror where a year earlier he'd stared at his reflection and felt like he was disappearing. That night at Wembley, Michael said, "You gave me permission to be broken, to be human, and it changed everything. So I want to give that same permission to someone else tonight." Marcus was confused until Michael explained his plan. Before going on stage, Michael was going to record a brief video message to be shown on the arena screens. In it, he was going to talk honestly about struggling with anxiety before performances, about the fear of not being good enough, about being human despite the superhuman expectations. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "That's incredibly vulnerable." "That's the point," Michael replied, smiling that famous smile. But this time, it reached his eyes in a way it hadn't in years. "Someone out there needs to hear it. Someone needs permission to struggle. And if I learned anything from our conversation, it's that my platform isn't just for entertainment, it's for truth." When that video played before Michael's performance that night, 20,000 people saw something they'd never seen before. Michael Jackson being completely courageously honest about his humanity. The stadium fell silent as Michael's recorded face appeared on the screens. He spoke simply, without performance, without pretense.
Before I come out here tonight, I want you to know something. I'm nervous. Even after all these years, I still get scared before every show. Scared I won't be good enough. Scared I'll disappoint you. Scared that I'm not as special as you think I am. But I've learned that admitting that fear doesn't make me weak, it makes me human. And being human, being honest about our struggles, is the bravest thing any of us can do. So tonight, I'm not just going to perform for you. I'm going to be honest with you, and I hope that gives you permission to be honest too, about your own fears, your own struggles. Because none of us, not even me, has to be perfect to be worthy of love. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. But it wasn't the usual celebrity worship. This was different. This was recognition. 20,000 people recognizing themselves in Michael's admission. 20,000 people feeling permission to be imperfect. When Michael took the stage that night, his performance was different. It was still spectacular. His talent hadn't diminished, but there was a new quality to it, a genuineness, a freedom that came from not having to hide anymore. And after the show, something happened that Marcus never expected. Michael brought Marcus out on stage during the encore, introducing him to the audience as the man who saved my life by giving me permission to be human. The story of their conversation in the Wembley storage room became public. And instead of being seen as evidence of weakness, it became one of the most powerful stories about Michael Jackson ever told. A story about courage, transformation, and the strength it takes to be vulnerable. The ripple effects of Michael's transformation extended far beyond his own life and career. Letters poured in from fans around the world, not just praising his music, but thanking him for his honesty about struggle. A teenage girl wrote, "I've been hiding my anxiety from everyone because I thought it meant I was weak. Hearing you talk about your own struggles made me realize I don't have to be perfect. I told my parents I needed help. Thank you for saving my life." A middle-aged executive wrote, "I've been at the top of my field for years, but I've never felt more alone. Your honesty about isolation despite success made me realize I'm not the only one. I'm going to start being more honest with the people I love." Marcus Thompson continued working security at Wembley, but he also became an advocate for mental health awareness in the entertainment industry. He gave talks about that conversation with Michael, emphasizing that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is give them permission to not be okay. The final chapter of this story came years later, in a way nobody could have predicted. In 2009, during the preparations for what would become his This Is It tour, Michael recorded a personal video message. It wasn't meant for public release. It was for his children, to be given to them when they were older. In that video, Michael talked about many things: his love for them, his hopes for their futures, his apologies for the difficulties his fame had brought to their lives. But he also talked about that night at Wembley and the conversation with Marcus Thompson. "I want you to know," he told his children, "that your father wasn't always strong. There were times when I felt broken, lost, scared. But I learned that admitting those feelings, being honest about struggling, is actually the strongest thing a person can do. Don't ever feel like you have to be perfect. Don't ever feel like you have to hide your humanity to be worthy of love. The real you, the struggling, imperfect, beautifully human you, is enough. It's more than enough. It's everything." When Michael passed away unexpectedly, that video became his final message, not just to his children, but to the world. It was shared widely, becoming one of the most viewed and quoted pieces of content related to his legacy. And Marcus Thompson, the security guard who had found a superstar crying in a storage room, became the keeper of a story that proved something powerful about human connection. Marcus was interviewed countless times after Michael's death, always asked the same question: what was it like meeting Michael Jackson? His answer never changed: "I didn't meet Michael Jackson that night. I met Michael. Just Michael. A person who was struggling and needed someone to tell him it was okay to struggle." The fact that he happened to be one of the most famous people on earth, that's what made his courage to be vulnerable even more important. He taught me that fame doesn't protect you from pain, but honesty about that pain can heal not just yourself, but everyone who hears your story. Today at Wembley Stadium, there's a small plaque in that storage area where Michael and Marcus had their conversation. It wasn't placed there by the venue or by Michael's estate. It was placed there by Marcus himself, with a simple inscription: "In this room, September 7th, 1988, Michael Jackson learned that the greatest performance is honesty. The biggest stage is vulnerability, and the truest strength is admitting when you're breaking." Every year on September 7th, Marcus returns to that spot. He sits on the same road case where Michael sat 20 years ago, and he thinks about how a single conversation, a single moment of human connection, changed not just one life but millions.
Because that's the thing about truth. It doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It heals. It gives permission. The fans who attended that Wembley concert in 1988 witnessed what they thought was the greatest performance of Michael Jackson's career. And in terms of technical artistry, maybe it was. But the greatest performance, the one that truly changed lives, happened in a storage room with no audience, no cameras, no applause. Just two human beings having an honest conversation about pain, struggle, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable. Michael Jackson spent most of his life trying to be superhuman for his audiences, and he succeeded in ways that few entertainers ever have. But his real power, his lasting legacy, came from the moments when he had the courage to be simply, honestly, courageously human. This story isn't really about Michael Jackson the superstar. It's about Michael, the person who struggled with the weight of expectations, who felt alone despite being surrounded by adoration, who had to learn that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's about all of us, because every person reading this, hearing this, sharing this story, has felt exactly what Michael felt in that storage room. The fear that if people see your struggles, they'll stop loving you. The pressure to keep performing, keep smiling, keep being strong even when you're breaking inside. Michael Jackson's greatest gift to the world wasn't just his music, his dancing, or his artistry, though all of those were extraordinary. His greatest gift was showing us that even the most talented, most successful, most admired people struggle, and that admitting that struggle, being honest about that pain, doesn't diminish your worth, it amplifies it. So the next time you feel like you have to be perfect, remember Michael in that storage room. Remember that the king of pop, surrounded by 72,000 people who loved him, still needed permission to be human, and then give yourself that same permission. Because your struggles don't make you weak, your honesty about those struggles makes you brave, and your willingness to be vulnerable might just give someone else permission to do the same. That's the real legacy of September 7th. Not the perfect performance on stage, but the honest conversation in the storage room. Not the superstar image, but the human truth. The strength wasn't in never breaking. It was in having the courage to break, and then using that breaking to heal not just yourself, but everyone who needed permission to struggle too.